here today. We're going to be doing a training on our transition back to in-person shopping at Rice Street. So thank you again for participating today. A little bit about why we're making this transition back to in-person shopping. Emma, if you want to go to the next slide. We know that the choice model shopping is so important to our participants. Over the last 3 years, we've only heard more questions from folks about when we'd be able to offer that again to our families. We know that since we've made the transition at our Midway food shelf, that it has been extremely successful. We've only heard positive things about folks being able to come back into our space and choose their own items. So we knew that if we could do it safely, we'd want to, put all of our effort into making it possible for our families to make those choices again. We're going to walk through what these changes entail, what safety precautions we're going to be putting in place. And we all just want to let you know that, this change has been very intentional. We've done a lot of planning to think through how we would optimize the flow of the shopping experience for our participants, as well as how roles would change to optimize our operations as well. So we will cover that in today's training. But first, we're going to talk about changes to the food shelf layout at Rice Street. Okay, so as you all know, we have significant space limitations at Rice Street. We're kind of limited to the footprint that we have available to us. So we won't be changing where the shelving is or where the coolers are or anything like that, but we'll be changing the order of where some of the categories are. And a lot of that's to incorporate non-processed food first, healthier choices first as folks go through the food shelf, and that's incorporating some behavior economics as part of the super shelf model. If some of you are unfamiliar, that's a pilot program through the University of Minnesota Extension in partnership with some other organizations like the Foundation for Essential Needs, and they have seen that folks that have this opportunity to shop on a food shelf that is more like a grocery store experience, that have those healthier food choices first, are more likely to make those healthier food choice options as they go through and shop. And so that's something we really want to incorporate in this transition as well. So as you can look through, the categories have changed. We're going to go over the changes in the names of the categories and what that all entails. But you can see here that we've put all of the canned fruits and vegetables first next to the loose produce, and then we have grains, and then our dry proteins, and then cooking and baking, and so on and so forth. So that is the general change of the overview of the layout. But you can see here when folks come in, they'll still come in through the front door, they'll walk through the lobby, our bread will still remain where it is. And instead of checking in at the window, we're going to be putting a table right in front of that window. And the Jules will sit there, or the other basic needs staff member who's the site manager on site that day will check folks in. This is going to allow us to increase our sight lines. Where we're currently doing intakes where Jules sits now, she isn't always able to see what's going on in the food shelf, but she can see into the lobby. So we're hoping that putting a table out into the lobby will allow us to see what's going on in the food shelf. She'll be more accessible to you. She'll be more accessible to participants. And then we'll just have a better sense of what's going on at all times. So they'll check in at that table there that will be in the lobby, and then they'll walk through the door where usually the greeter is now, or the front person during curbside, the curbside model. They'll take a right to the meat freezer and dairy fridge, and then they'll walk down the loose produce section with the canned fruits and vegetables, grains, sweets will remain where it is. And then they'll take a left past the garage door, and then take another left where they'll get to do shop through household and hygiene products, dry protein, cooking and baking, prepared meals. Miscellaneous is that end cap we have available now where we put peanut butter and oil and flour and some of those like limited choice options so that the greeter or front person has access to that right away. Not sure if we'll keep that end cap there, but then they'll take a right and head to the deli fridge And then they'll hit the snacks and beverages shelf and then straight out the back door. So the goal with this flow is one way in, one way out. We'll be encouraging folks to continue walking through the food shelf. They won't be able to double back. This will help again with flow and ensuring that, we don't have folks kind of just walking all over. It'd be easier for us to really get a good sense of how many people in our space and kind of monitoring traffic, so to speak. But that is the general changes of the layout. Any questions about the layout?
Yes. Will the Asian foods be mixed in with the other foods?
That's a great question, Erin. Yes, we're planning to incorporate all culturally specific food into sections. We won't have a dedicated culturally specific area now. There might be specific limits on those items, as you go through. For example, if we had canned bamboo shoots, that would be in canned fruit and vegetable section. We might say limit 2 cans per household, and that would be specific limit for that section. We'll talk more about the shopping model a little bit later into the presentation. But again, like soy sauce would be in cooking and baking, and we again might limit that 1 per household or something like that.
Good question, though. We had that question yesterday as well.
I have another one. You said people can't double back, but that's probably not practical in all cases. They may say, "Oh, I forgot this." Is that going to be the volunteer who gets that item, or are they
That's a great question. So at Midway, we have a one way in, one way out, or sort of like one directional flow at the food shelf as well. We don't typically have people double back. If they didn't see something, they might ask a volunteer to help grab those things. Otherwise, it hasn't been an issue. So I can't speak to like when that would ever happen. But typically we have our shopping assistant roles for a reason. We will have you as volunteers placed strategically throughout the food shelf to assist folks and grab items for things and explain the shopping model. So it really shouldn't be an issue, but if it does come up, I think if it becomes an issue, I think we'll talk about, tips and tricks for us to resolve those before it becomes, a persisting issue.
Thank you.
Okay, next slide. Okay, so the changes to the shopping model. I'm not sure if you all have the ability to raise your hand on Zoom, but I'd love to see how many of you were volunteers pre-COVID, or you could type in the chat. And if you remember or raise your hand, thanks, Vance, and just indicate if you were a volunteer pre-COVID or not. If you were, you will likely remember that we used to have a shopping list, and they were quite large and long, and they had a lot of words on them, and they're translated in a bunch of different languages. And we also, we had them specified by household size. And that shopping list would indicate how many items the family would be able to select based on the category they're shopping in or for a specific item. We heard a lot of feedback from our volunteers, from our participants, that it wasn't very accessible, it was confusing, and the shopping list limited what staff were also able to show what we had available at the food shelf. So when we thought about the shopping model, when we first moved back to in-person shopping at Midway, we wanted to make sure it was accessible as possible. It was easy to understand and something that folks would, kind of catch on really quickly. So we have stuck to the household size based limits, but we've changed our colors and the way that folks will determine how many items they can take from a section. So when folks arrive, they check in with Jules at that table in the lobby. Jules will know how many individuals they have in their household size and assign them a color. Let's say the household she's checking in at the time has 10 people in their household. They would be green, so she would give them a green card. So in this cute little graphic that Emma made, there's a green card on the front of this cart here, and that would be their shopping guide as they walk through the food shelf. So for this example, once they get to canned fruits and vegetables, we would say, you're green here, so you'll follow that number throughout the food shelf, and that will tell you how many items you can take. And so this family would be able to take 6 items, up to 6 items in that section. Something I like to tell folks too is that, you don't have to take all 6 items, but you can take up to 6. That's never been a question before, but in case you do get that. But that is how folks will know as they walk through the food shelf that they'll get to grains. There will be number assigned based on their color, that sort of thing. So that is what the new shopping model will be. They won't have a shopping list anymore, just a color-coded card on a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. We'll put that in a laminated sleeve, and each family will get that as they come in, and then they'll return it to us when we leave, or when they leave, sorry. Any questions about the shopping model?
No substitutions?
What do you mean by that?
If I only want 4 vegetables and I'm allowed 6, can I get 2 of something else?
No, yes, that's a great question. It is limited to the section. So each section will have its own limits. If they choose to opt not to take the higher limit number for that section, they will not be able to sub it with any other items from any other category, because each category will have its own limits. That's a great question.
Yeah, we often have people say, oh, hey, I need some extra waters, or I need some of this. And so that none of that's going to be allowed.
Nope.
Okay.
The one
Good
thing that will
question.
change, so most of the limits will stay the same every day, but as you guys know, we have some things that are kind of variable, such as loose produce. And so what happens is we actually have kind of markers where we change the limits for those each day to kind of make sense with how much food we have available for participants. So that will be a little bit different.
Bread always seemed to be unlimited. Is that
Yep,
still?
since that will be in the lobby. Yep.
Okay.
That will be unlimited still. And then it will mainly, these like fluctuating numbers will mainly be dependent for meat, dairy, and the deli coolers. So it's really the coolers that will fluctuate the most, as you all know. And so Jules does an awesome job at updating those signs before every shift. And so those are something you'll still be able to keep an eye out on, or check in with her about prior to service starting.
The one other thing that will be different is the carts. So Georgie, do you want to talk about the carts real quick?
Yes, so I'm sure you're all familiar with the big bulky carts that we have at Rice Street right now that end up piling up in the kitchen, and we're all kind of maneuvering around them. We've purchased some beautiful new carts that are smaller, kind of envision like a Kowalski's cart or a Lenz and Barley's, those like really nice, smaller, compact 2-tier basket shopping carts. Instead of the bottom tier basket, it will be a flat, I don't even know how to explain that. There isn't a basket, so it'll be a flat surface, kind of like the bottom rack of a normal shopping cart. And so folks will be able to put a box on the bottom there and have bags on the top. We have found at Midway it has been really nice because it's a space saver. Folks have really enjoyed being able to use those carts instead of the bigger bulky ones. And it just allows folks to pack directly into boxes and bags as they shop. So that's one major change about this shopping model, is that we will be encouraging folks to pack as they go. There won't be a packing station at the end. And so when they come in, we'll get them their box and their bag, and just reminding folks, please pack as you go and not to put things loose in the cart, as that will cause traffic issues at the very end of the shop.
And the one other thing that's something that was brought up during the focus group that we hadn't really thought about was, when families come in and they do have a young child, where they would use the carts to, have the child there. So we will keep some of the old carts for families who maybe want to put their child in the basket.
That also brings up another good point. So if a family comes in with young children and there are 2 adults present, we will ask that they wait and only have 1 adult shop through the food shelf. However, we understand that sometimes folks are limited with childcare options and will bring their children into the food shelf. And so if that is the case, it's just a parent and children, we will allow them to go through together. That might mean that we won't allow as many shoppers at one time, still being mindful of how many folks we have in the food shelf at one time. But that is going to be up to the site manager's discretion. So Jules will make, a final call about how many people will go in and that sort of thing. Great. Moving forward. So changes to the food categories. So as I touched on when we went over the food shelf layout, we are renaming some of the categories. Previously, the categories were very specific, like boxed meals or canned soups. And so we're going to be making our categories more broad so that we can include more items in that section. And so as folks go through and they shop by category, they should have more options to choose from. And I'm hoping that it will make it more clear to you all as volunteers and participants, like what is in the section that they're shopping for. It should be pretty straightforward. You go to canned fruits and vegetables, what's in that section? Canned fruits and vegetables. And then we'll have loose produce that won't change. We'll have grains that will include cereal, pasta, rice, and oatmeal. Cooking and baking, again, any item that's used for cooking and baking, condiments, spices, jello, baking mixes, that will all go in cooking and baking. Dry protein, that's all of your canned beans, dry beans, peanut butter, canned fish and meat. Prepared meals, that includes any ramen, kind of easy to cook meals. Microwavable soups, hamburger helper style stuff, other boxed and packaged meals will go in that section. And then snacks and beverages will remain the same. Household and misc is probably the section we'll see fluctuate the most. As you all know, we don't always have household and hygiene items. And misc stuff, we get all sorts of fun things from food rescue, sometimes a whole bunch of old, leftover Easter decorations. Most of the time that goes in the lobby, but sometimes, it's things that we don't want to put out in the lobby, so they go into miscellaneous. And so that section will probably fluctuate the most, but anything that doesn't have a clear category will probably go there. Lastly, sweets and bread, again, those won't change, and bread will not have limits. Any questions about changes to food categories?
So what's in the fridges?
The fridges will remain the same.
The deli?
Yep, the deli sections will remain the same. Yes, so the categories, the food categories are mainly talking about the shelving units and the way that we categorize our dry items. So meat will still go where it goes, all of our frozen meat, all of our dairy items will go in the same cooler. The deli section, as you all know, with Food Rescue at Rice Street, we get a surplus of cooler produce, and so where it fits, we put it basically in the deli cooler. So one cooler won't be designated to one specific thing, like all yogurt or just your traditional deli prepared meals, kind of like chicken wings or wraps or salads or that sort of thing, won't go in one section. So we'll be a little bit more fluid about those deli coolers because, again, we get such a variety of things, including our Minnesota Central Kitchen meals that we get on Tuesdays. And so, like I said, we'll be a little bit more flexible with that.
Does the color coding apply to the freezer or the item in the freezer?
Yes. Yep. The color coding will apply to that, and those are where our blank numbers will come in, where Jules will write what the limits are that day for those sections. And so it will be very clear to folks as they approach the cooler how many items they'll be able to take, and it'll be by cooler, not by, like when folks go to the deli area, it won't be you can take 5 items from both coolers. It'll be very clear, this cooler you can take 5 items, this cooler you can take 5 items.
And the fridges with you can't see into, I guess you have a list of what's in them.
We'll have folks, they'll be able to open the cooler and, they can ask volunteers questions. Our shoppers will be able to ask questions. But you're right, some of our coolers won't be as visible to all of our shoppers to see what's inside. So unfortunately, they will have to open to see what's in there. And then I did see Tom asked, how will produce be handled? For loose produce in particular, each family will be instructed based on their household size It's 1 bag of fruit, 1 bag veggie. For larger families, they'll be able to take 2 bags of fruit and 2 bags of vegetables, and they will select that themselves. We won't be pre-packing anything anymore. It will truly be all choice. Any other questions? These are really good questions. Okay. So volunteer roles. We have a couple of changes. Emma, do you want to quickly touch on changes to the shift times before we dive into the shift roles?
Yeah, for sure. So if you haven't checked your schedule yet, it is on Logistics. If you are hoping to sign up for shifts as your schedule allows via VicNet, definitely check it out. It's live, and so we do have shifts that are available. If you have any questions about your schedule concerns, please just let me know. Give me an email, give me a call, and we can get that figured out together. But there are a few little changes to schedule or shift times. So the early AM shift, it still starts at 8, but it actually goes 15 minutes later to 9:45. And the reason for that is it's ever more so important that we get the pallets off the ground if possible before, shopping happens. And so with that, we've added 15 extra minutes. We know it just depends on the day and the deliveries that we get, but we did that with Midway too, and it seemed to help a little bit just to have that extra time. The AM shift now, it moves back to 9:45 as the start time, and it ends at 12:15. So it's a half an hour shorter. But we'll get into the logistics of what each role entails. Then we have a midday service prep shift. That's from 12:15 to 1:15. Very short shift, but essentially it's when our food shelf is closed. Usually our staff are eating, but we have a few volunteers that come in and just essentially restock the shelves and get ready for service again. We know, at Midway, we have a storage side and a market side. And so sometimes during service, when we get donations, we're usually just able to sort it on the storage side. And we know we don't have that at Rice Street. So this will be a point in time each day where we can grab those donations out of the kitchen and, sort through them and look through things. So that'll be our midday service prep shift, just helping get ready for afternoon service. And then the afternoon service is from 1:15 to 4. Questions on that? Okay, Georgie, if you want to get into specifics on the roles then.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for going over shift times. So early AM shift, that won't change. It's truly just working through that delivery and prepping for service. And then for our morning shift and afternoon shift, the changes in roles, we now have 3 different roles. We'll have a greeter, we'll have 2 shopping assistants, and maybe a flex sort of stocking role, depending on how many folks are signed up for a shift. And then, as Emma mentioned, we'll have a midday stocking shift as well. So first, we'll cover the greeter role and what that all entails. So our greeter will be stationed pretty much in the same spot as the front person is now with our curbside model, right by kind of the front door, not the front door, but the entrance to the food shelf, and near kind of the middle aisle of the food shelf as well. So this individual will be welcoming our shoppers to the food shelf, explaining the shopping process. Here's your color-coded card. What does that mean? You're going to start going to your right here to the meat freezer and then dairy fridge, as well as helping our shopper grab carts and bags. And then the next role is our shopping assistant. We'll have 2 shopping assistants, and they will be stationed in separate areas. So the first one will be in that first aisle there near the produce section and canned fruits and vegetables and grains. And then the second person will be near the deli fridge and kind of back door. Both of these individuals will be guiding shoppers, assisting them with the cooler items, as well as restocking in between folks if there's time. Really with these stations, it's pretty flexible. What I really envision is that you're kind of moving up and down the aisle, just checking in with folks, seeing if they have questions about the shopping process, if they're finding everything okay. And again, just that flexibility of stocking if possible, if there's some downtime. Any questions about the greeter role or the shopping assistant role?
I have several questions. Sorry.
No, it's a good
so,
time.
First of all, not regarding the role, but have you considered putting arrows on the floor?
We have considered putting arrows on the floor. We do have partners at 3M that have given us some of their like warehouse floor tape. We did do that at Midway. And so that is something that we are anticipating doing at Rice Street as well. For the number of people of each role, the early shift, the number of shift slots that we'll have available will remain the same. I don't remember those at the top of my head. Jules is saying 4, but it depends on a delivery day because we could have more folks. So give or take 4 folks.
Yeah, we'll keep probably 4 slots open for every day except Friday. But it just depends on who signs up, obviously. So.
Okay, and then go ahead.
Yeah, I still have 3 questions. How many clients are there in there at one time? 1?
There will be 3 shoppers to start at one time going through the food shelf. We anticipate having between 3 and 5. We're going to start with 3 and see how that goes. We want to see what the flow is like, how that feels, having all of our volunteers in there with shoppers at the same time. As we understand, for safety reasons, we want to allow social distancing, but also we want to have, elbow room so folks aren't feeling like they're shopping on top of one another.
Okay. How do the carts get back to the front?
That's a good question. So as part of the deli backdoor sort of role and you're assisting people, what I envision is that this person will assist the shopper as they leave the food shelf and help them unpack things from their cart and make sure that cart stays inside. And then we'll be bringing it back to the front. So we will have to do some manual walking of the cart back to the front, but to also monitor the number of shoppers in our space, we'll have a limited number of carts. And so we'll tell folks, we can't have the next shopper come in until you're finished with your cart. So please be mindful of your neighbors. The next person's waiting on you to finish your shop.
And they can take the cart all the way to the car, or are we going to have a table back there where they?
I think we could have a table back there and we could have them unload their items and then bring their car around. That makes the most sense to me. I would opt to not have folks take the cart outside of our space just to make sure that we're keeping track of them all.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they may try to walk home with them. What happens with donations that come during the shift?
So all donations that come in during the shift, we're going to have to put in the kitchen or in office space and just wait until that midday prep shift to kind of handle that, or when service is over in the afternoon, but keeping it kind of tucked away and not leaving it on the scale throughout the shift. And so if we do have a 4th volunteer for a shift or for a service that day, that person will be really vital in making sure that as donations are coming in, they're getting to the kitchen, they're getting weighed and then getting to the kitchen or going into the office for storage temporarily.
And if there are only 3, one of the other people has to do that as well?
That is correct, or we'll have to pause checking in folks and staff will have to run out there and grab the donations. Kind of what we are currently doing anyways.
And we have a few messages. Aaron, do you have any others? I don't want to cut you off.
No, I'm done. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you for asking those questions. Those are really good. We have a few in the chat. So Rick said, how many people for each role? Very good question. So as Julia said, early role just depends. It depends how big our delivery is. That's how each day, that's how we decide how many volunteers we will need for it. For the greeter, we usually only have 1 person be the greeter. We'll have 2 be shopping assistants and 1 be that flex person. So one thing that we talked about in the email that I just wanted to reiterate, if we don't have 2 shopping assistants, we will move that restocking or flex person to be a shopping assistant. And so if you don't feel comfortable, interacting, or that's not really the job for you, I would highly recommend either trying the midday service prep shift or the early morning shift. but we'll have 2 shopping assistants and hopefully a restocking volunteer. For the midday service prep shift, we have 3 spots available. And then for the afternoon, it's just the exact same thing as the morning. The other questions we had, Cindy, will we be wearing a tag or something else to let people know we're volunteers and available to help? Good question. We can always have that if you guys want. I don't think we'll do individual names because we used to do that and it was just so many tags flying around and people would forget theirs and things like that. But with that being said, maybe we can make some tags that just say volunteer so that if
and I know
want
at Midway, I think Tyler keeps like sticky
ones, yeah,
We
that
can
can
do
just say
that for sure.
volunteer.
Yeah.
So we can definitely have something like that for you guys. And then Rick said, do you envision that we will have enough volunteers? Where do you anticipate greatest deficiencies in volunteers? Georgie, do you want to answer that or do you want me to tackle that?
I think that's a really good question, Rick. Emma has done a lot of work to rebuild the schedule for in-person shopping thus far. And so far we're looking pretty good. I think just keep an eye out on VicNet if you have a flexible schedule and you're willing to sign up for shifts. Keep an eye on that because that's the best way to find out. We also are unsure until that week of Jules sends out her emails on Thursday or Friday asking for additional help for the week, the next week. But until we check that, the schedule on Logistics or for you all on VicNet and signing up for shifts, we won't know typically until that week. And it can fluctuate. Of course, with summer approaching and folks going on vacation and heading up to their cabins and things, we anticipate as normal during the summertime, we'll probably have some open shifts available. So I would highly recommend just keeping an eye out on VicNet.
Yeah, and thanks to all of you guys, a lot of our shifts have been filled. And so thank you for filling out the survey and doing that. I know, especially the early morning, it'll be even more important to make sure we have a full crew to get those deliveries away, as well as that mid-day service prep shift. We don't have a lot of volunteers for that yet because it's just a new shift. But at Midway, we started to have people kind of trickle in to try that shift and see how it is. So if you're doing the AM shift and you want to stick around for another hour and try it out, we definitely welcome you. The other question we got from Jolene, do you have any Keystone volunteer t-shirts? We do not. That's something maybe we can talk about in the future, but currently we don't have any Keystone volunteer t-shirts. Good question though.
There's also a question for Robin about handling a shopper who is slower in front of one who has fewer needs and is ready to jump past a slower one. That's a really good question. So at Midway, what we usually do is, if you're noticing that someone's kind of waiting behind someone, you can go talk to that shopper that's in front of them and just say, do you mind if we, scooch past you here? This person's ready to keep going. And typically that's okay. I think it's helpful if we do kind of that soft handoff instead of, letting participants just kind of go in front, but we've had that happen before, just like in normal grocery store experience. Sometimes someone's looking at something in the same aisle or section that you're looking at. But I would say, you can talk to the shopper that's ahead of the individual you're noticing is ready to go forward and just let them know that we're going to be going around them and just letting them know. Otherwise, typically it hasn't been, I would say, a huge problem. But of course, everyone has their own shopping style, and some people like to spend more time reading all of the ingredients for things, especially if they have dietary restrictions. So we definitely don't want to be pressuring folks to shop faster, but we can just let them know that other folks will be waiting for them and encourage them, to ask questions if they need assistance.
We had a few questions about limits, but we're actually going to talk about that later in the presentation. So I'll keep those in mind. And then after we talk about them, if you guys still have questions about them, we're more than happy to answer them. Okay, so I'll go to the next slide.
Okay, great. So as Emma mentioned with the stalker and flex assistant role, this person will really be helping us with stocking and organizing, accepting donations, but can also assist shoppers. However, if we do not have enough shopping assistants or the greeter role is not filled, we will ask whoever signed up as the flex assistant role to step in so that we have enough volunteers for a smooth service. Emma's going to cover this gift acceptance form and just some tips and tricks about accepting donations.
Yeah, so not only are you the face of Keystone when it's greeting participants, but even more so for our participants, also our donors. And so, you know, sometimes that's not always noticed or in your job description, but we know we get donations all the time. And so thank you, first of all, for welcoming our donors, making them feel welcome in the space, as well as accepting their donations. So of course, when a donor comes in, the first thing to do is welcome them, greet them, and then weigh their donation. Something that kind of seems like check the box, I know, are these gift acceptance forms. But with that, they're so important for our development team. So I just wanted to take a moment to talk about them quick. And so the best thing that you can do when a participant or a donor comes in is to, you know, grab the donation as well as give them a clipboard, a pen, and this piece of paper, and just ask them to fill it out for us. We use this for recording as well as if we get audited, and it's a way for us to also thank the donor. And so with that, usually the easiest thing to do, of course, is just hand it over, have them fill it out. You can put the date received, and then received by, you can write your name. If the donor says, I don't want to fill it out, that's completely fine. We really don't want to pressure donors into filling it out. If you can, just try to get at least their name and one form of contact information, whether that's an email or a phone number. If the donor really doesn't want their name listed, though, just put wishes to remain anonymous. You know, check off this button right here and you're good to go. The one other thing is donors who do reoccurring donations. So we get a lot of bakeries and different groups who will bring donations on a weekly basis. They do not need to fill out the form every time. So if they say, oh, I give on a reoccurring basis, just ask them for their name. And so that way, we have their name in the database and we can still record their donation. So that's kind of how donation forms work. If someone really feels uncomfortable with not doing it though, just please check off wishes to remain anonymous. Questions on that?
So if they're recurring and you get their name, do you fill out the form?
So if they're returning, you can just write received by your name, the date received, their name. I mean, if you can get one piece of contact information just in case we don't have them in the system, that's great, but you don't need to fill out the rest of the form. The only other thing you need to fill out is the pounds of food though. So that way we can look up if it's, you know, the Roseville Farmers Market, we can look up Roseville Farmers Market and then list their pounds of food and then we're good to go. So those are the only things you have to list. Good question, Erin. Thank you for that. Any other questions on the form? Thank you guys, we appreciate it. The girl across from me in the cube, Elena, she is the one who has to input all these with Susan. So they really appreciate your help with these. Okay, I'll do next slide.
Okay, so this slide will answer the last two questions we just got in the chat. So we want to provide you all some best practices. So when you're greeting a shopper, you know, we want to make sure that our shoppers are feeling welcome into our space. You will want to wait for the site manager's cue to bring in the next shopper. Sometimes folks will line up at that door coming into the food shelf, and so just waiting until the site manager gives them the go-ahead to come in, because again, we want to monitor the number of shoppers we have in our space. That's super helpful. Explaining the shopping model, I think that will be really helpful as folks are getting adjusted to this. But at Midway, we've seen folks, you know, catch on after their first shop, after they've been there one time and they've come back, they've been able to have a very smooth experience following. So lastly, answering any questions. You know, like Emma said, you're going to be the first face that a lot of our donors see, but then also for our participants, and being sure you're available to answer any questions that they might have about this new process or where to find things. That's always super helpful. Sometimes folks are shy too about asking questions, so I always like to check in and see, you know, if they're finding everything okay, if they have any questions, or if they need assistance in one way or another. With shopping, again, assisting folks as they walk through, making sure they understand the categories, or that each section or each category has its own limits. And then safety. So sanitizing, we're going to be sanitizing high touch areas and encouraging social distancing when possible. You know, we want to make sure that we still will be limiting the number of folks in the lobby at a time. And while we have this new process with the number of folks in the food shelf at one time, we still will have gloves during that early morning prep shift. If you feel more comfortable wearing gloves, if you would like to help shoppers, you know, go through the meat freezer, that's also something that will be available to you as well. So some helpful phrases to answer some questions about what to say when a shopper is not following the shopping limits that we are providing. So if in this example, let's say the family has an orange card, it's a single person household, we would say you can take up to 2 items in this canned fruits and vegetables section. Oh, it looks like you have 3 items here, but you're orange and you can take 2. You know, which 2 items would you like to keep? I like to emphasize that we want to keep the tone very positive and not say, you know, like you have to put something back, or not reaching into a participant's cart and taking things out. So just using, you know, more soft sort of guiding language to remind folks about the limits that we have in place. However, you know, we are in the business of food access and bringing more food out to the community. So if it becomes, you know, something where the shoppers continuously doing this throughout their shop, more times often than not, they are in need of that food. And so I might take a note of it, but I would let them keep going, and you might continue to gently remind them what the limits are for each section, or let the other shopping assistant know as they get to their section. The only time we'll really be really strict about this or have a larger conversation with the shopper is if we note that at every single shop, they're not adhering to those shopping limits. At that time, you would want to let the site manager know, Jules, or, you know, myself if I'm on site that day, and we would have a conversation with the shopper. We would not ask you as a volunteer to do that sort of, to have that difficult conversation. It's also an opportunity for staff to check in and see if there's anything else we might be able to provide the family, to see if they're connected to SNAP, if they know about some other programs like Fair for All, the discounted grocery program through the food group, and just get them connected to any additional resources. Sometimes their families are going through significant crisis and they might just need a little extra to get through. And so even though we have these limits put in place until it becomes, you know, every shop they're continuously doing this, then we'll have a conversation with them. But we want to give folks the benefit of the doubt and be really gentle during their shop. Aaron, you have a question?
Yeah. On the limits, I mean, some items are just tiny. Like you can't give person 1 cherry tomato. You can't give them 1 gumdrop. So how do you handle things that are not standard size?
Yeah. So as you all know, like in our snack section, we have our granola bars or whatever that we open the box, and we have a lot of smaller sort of snacks and things. At Midway, what we do is we put a little sign that's like 10 equals 1. So 10 of these smaller things equals 1 larger item. That involves some math, but typically it goes over okay. As far as the produce, you know, we do say 1 bag fruit, 1 bag veggie. We're not limiting specific items. Sometimes we do, if it's like a watermelon, you know, we'd say every family is limited to 1 watermelon. But typically it's just that bag, and so they can make that their own decision on that. I'm trying to think of some other items where it wouldn't be as equitable because they're really small. The first thing that really comes to mind is snacks, though. For beverages,
I forgot about the bag at produce. You know, I mean, you could have a bag at the snack area too, I suppose.
Yes, we could. So we do have number limits for snacks and beverages, though. So we'll probably do some sort of, you know, a handful of these items equals 1, and that way they feel like they're able to take more, because not all snacks that we get are equal in size. But that's a really great question. Any other questions about limits? Ooh, good one, Jane. Canned veggies, single serve, 28 ounces. So For larger cans, you know, some I would say that there have been some instances I'm chuckling to myself because I'm thinking our other site manager once ordered from Second Harvest these huge like 115 ounce cans of like crushed tomatoes or something. They were really cheap, but didn't know how large they were. So we put them in the lobby because it becomes an issue of like, how's it equitable? How do we distribute those? So we just made it kind of free for all. For the canned veggies that are 28 ounces, I think we'll just treat those the same. It's not big enough where we would really limit those ones unless, you know, our focus with limiting specific items are they're high demand, high cost, or something like that. Then we'd say, you know, like 1 oil for every family, 1 sugar, 1 flour, some of those bigger items. That's an instance where we'd really limit those. I would not be too worried about, you know, those crushed tomatoes that come in those 28 ounces.
Cindy also asked a question about produce. Will we separate
Mhm.
fruits from vegetables so it's clear?
That is a good question. You know, this is something that we haven't talked about specifically. We'll probably have to be mindful about when we're unloading that delivery from food rescue and working through the produce and having like one side of the table be fruit, one side of the table be veggie. At Midway, we don't have this problem because we have 2 separate tables that are across from each other. So one table is dedicated to fruit and one table is dedicated to veggie. But I think we'll just have to be more intentional when we're unloading those pallets and putting separate sections. But for signage that we have available, it just says loose fruits and vegetables. So they'll be all together. But that's a great question, Cindy. Jules, did you have something else to add? I saw that you unmuted.
No, I just figured that's something we probably will have to like be just figuring out. I think there's a likelihood that we'll probably shift to just doing, it doesn't matter what you put in the bag. I think that's more likely than not what's going to happen eventually. But we can out trying to separate things and see if that works at all. So
yeah, good point. You know, this is all just a learning curve as we adjust to the space constraints and just the uniqueness of rice in itself, and we'll continue to adjust. And as you all get into your first shifts and have feedback, you know, Jules and Emma and I are open to any emails, or if you want to stop and chat with us about ideas or feedback that you have, we want to hear it. But it will be an adjustment and we'll just kind of tweak things as we go. I agree with Jules though. I wouldn't be surprised if it's something in the end where we say 1 bag of fruit and veggie together or 2 bags of fruits and vegetables, and they, you know, our participants are the ones shopping and figuring that out. Erin, did you have another question?
I'm sorry to have so many.
No,
Yeah,
don't apologize.
Some of these will be clear once we get there, but you know, a lot of we have pallets. I guess the food's going to be in milk crates. Is that right? Or that sort of thing. We don't have tables underneath the dry goods and stuff. So it's, or the snacks. So, and some things are kind of high for some people where we store them. Are you planning on changing the level?
Yes, we are. So tomorrow and Friday, we're going to be closed to transition the food shelf space to get ready for in-person shopping. We're going to be bringing over additional shelving from some of our other sites. The goal is to have a specific shopping shelf where we have, you know, flats of things that are ready to be, you know, taken and easy to reach items for our shoppers. And then we'll still have the very top rack for storage and the very bottom rack for storage. But right now I totally understand what you mean, where we just kind of have the top flat that just we rip open and then that's what we're kind of packing our bags from. In this new process, we will have a dedicated kind of shopping area and stocking either from the bottom up or from the top down, if that makes sense. So we do plan to bring more shelving racking over to kind of mitigate that. Other questions? Okay. Well, that's the last slide that we have. So feel free to type in the chat if you have any other additional questions. We will not have taped off areas at the food shelf. That is a good question, though. You know, we will have the office area that will be separate and the kitchen area that will be separate. For isolating our kind of stocking stuff, we talked about it. I used to run a different food shelf, and we did have these really gorgeous vinyl banners that we covered all of our extra inventory at the bottom. However, what ended up happening was we'd have folks kind of roll that up and pin it up so that it was easier to stock because they were tired of flipping the banner up and down. And so we can think more about how we want to cover it. But for right now, our plan is to have, you know, those cases of products below. So that's a good question.
We have a few more. So one thing Jean said was that Jean was a volunteer beforehand, before pre-pandemic. She just said we did not shop on both sides before, so this may slow things down. And when people bring their own bags and fill as they go, we're not able to see what is in their cart as much. Those are things definitely, like, as we go along, please do provide us your feedback. So like, you know, we realized we did this at my Midway first to kind of, you know, see how things would go. And we were able to use a lot of things we learned at Midway for Rice Street. But with that being said, Rice Street's a whole different ball game. Also, Rice Street's set up differently. So as time goes along, please do provide your feedback. We'd like to hear it. And we will make changes, you know, as we go along if needed. The other questions we had, will very large families take 2 carts from Jane?
We can, and I think I'll let, you know, the site managers make that call on the threshold of how large of a family will get 2 carts. But typically we'll give them 2 separate cards of the color that they are. For example, you know, in the earlier example of the shopping model, the family was green. They get 2 green shopping cards, 1 for each cart. That way you know why they have 2 carts and you can better assist them. But we have done that at Midway too, and it has worked pretty slick. Let's see, other questions about bathroom use. So we will, because shoppers will now be allowed in the food shelf, they will be able to use the bathroom. We do at Midway ask them to wait. You know, they go through their shop, and once they reach the bathroom, that's where they can use it. But we won't have folks just going in to use the bathroom and then go back into the lobby. So we kind of want to keep that flow, so to speak. There's going to be, of course, exceptions to things, and that will be up to the site manager's discretion of when folks will be able to use the restroom, but we will be allowing folks to do that again.